Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Bill Loftus, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters, North County, San Diego. And I'm joined today by a fellow member, Meg Thode. For over 100 years, the League of Women Voters has worked to create a more perfect democracy. Since our founding in 1920 by the leaders of the women's suffrage movement, we have been a nonpartisan, activist, grassroots organization that believes voters should play a critical role in democracy. One of our key roles is education. We have studied the state propositions and local ballot measures you will be deciding and offer our understanding drawn from official sources. The League also advocates for policy matters that align with our positions on making democracy work. Some propositions on the ballot are being endorsed by the League, and you can find that on our website. The League doesn't support or oppose any candidate or political party. As you listen, whether proposition or local measure, some things for you to consider. Propositions are proposed laws presented to the public to vote on. Propositions can make new laws, change existing laws, and sometimes change the California Constitution. They can be placed on a ballot by people who collect enough voter signatures or by the state lawmakers. Arguments offered by supporters and opponents contained in the slides are not vetted by us. They are paid for by the proponents and opponents. Our role is not to persuade you to vote one way or another. The decision on how to vote is yours and yours alone. A state proposition passes and becomes law if it receives more than 50% of the yes vote, 50% yes votes. Some local measures require 55% or 2/3 vote of the people. We have one today in our local measures. You don't need to vote for every measure or every candidate. Leaving a blank does not eliminate your ballot. Use the Voters Edge website link to see your ballot, including details about contributions made by the proponents of a measure. We've been told that following the money is an important factor in making people's decisions. And since this webinar is being recorded at a certain date in history, and there's several weeks still to go with the election, you're well advised to check on Voters Edge to find out what the latest information about who's contributing pro and con. Here's some important voting details. Remember, all active registered voters in California will receive a ballot in the mail. San Diego County ballots will be mailed in the week of October 5th. It's important to check your registration online or call this number for the Registrar of Voters, 1-858-565-5800. Be aware, though, of registration deadlines. If you're registering or re-registering less than 15 days before the election, that'll be after October 19th, you'll need to complete the same-day voter registration process and request your ballot in person or at your county elections office or polling location. If you need to vote in person, polling places will be open this year for 4 days, October 31st, November 1st, 2nd, through the end of the day on election November 3rd. Check your polling place because some of the locations have changed. Let's now turn our attention to the 4 measures that Oceanside voters will have an opportunity to vote upon in this election. Number 1, Oceanside term limits, called Measure K. This measure on term limits was placed on the ballot by the unanimous vote of the City Council. 3 San Diego County cities, Chula Vista, Coronado, and San Diego, they limit their City Council members to 2 consecutive terms. La Mesa, National City, San Marcos, they allow up to 3 consecutive terms. The way it is now, well, in Oceanside, the mayor and city council are elected positions with 4-year terms. Under current law, the city does not impose any term limits on any of its elected officials. There's no limit to the number of terms that a council member or mayor can serve. Measure K would establish term limits for the mayor and city council members. Council members could serve 3 4-year terms, consecutive or not. The mayor could serve 3 4-year terms, consecutive or not. The term served in one role, that of council member or mayor, would not count against the other. So if an elected official serves a maximum of 3 4-year terms as a member of the city council, he or she could serve an additional 3 4-year terms as the mayor of the city of Oceanside. Term limits would apply to elected or appointed terms. Partial terms of more than 2 years will count as a full term. Some restrictions apply. Term limits would apply to elected and appointed positions to fill a vacant seat. A partial term of 2 years or more counts as a full term for both the mayor and the city council member. Measure K will not apply to the elected positions of city clerk or city treasurer, and if passed, it would take effect immediately. The fiscal effects, well, there really are no particular fiscal effects of this measure except for the cost the city has to pay to the Registrar of Voters for printing and circulating the ballot. Supporters listed here, and some of the arguments made in support of this measure by the mayor of Oceanside, Peter Weiss. For opponents, there was no opposition filed with the city clerk for Measure K. To follow the money and see the latest contributors, look on Voter's Edge using this link. In summary, a yes vote means you're in favor of establishing term limits of 3 4-year terms for the mayor and the city council. A no vote means you're in favor of the current system of having no term limits for the mayor and city council. Let's move on to Measure L. It's referred to as the North River Farms referendum. The history of the North River Farms development goes back to a public notice regarding the project's environmental impact report scheduled for November 22nd, 2017, almost 3 years ago. Modifications of the plans by the developer and subsequent planning commission meetings occurred during all of 2018, with another submission in January of 2019. On January 28th, 2019, the Planning Commission, on a vote of 3 to 1 to 1, recommended denial of the project. 5 months later, on May 6th, 2019, the Planning Commission reviewed another plan modification and voted 6 to 0 to deny recommending the plan to the City Council. By way of background, here's the activity of the last 12 months, particularly what brought this to the ballot for November. The way it is now, zoning is agricultural, and the citizens of Oceanside placed this issue on the November ballot by collecting signatures. This measure is different from the others. It's a referendum. Oceanside, by the way, is a charter city, and according to their charter, it follows California law for this referendum. Here's a visual of the parcel for the North River Farms project on the left, and a picture of the Morrow Hills neighborhood in the northeast portion of the city of Oceanside. What would change? This shows the ordinance that would change to rezone the acres needed for the project. The only fiscal estimates provided by the city reflect the cost of the city, once again, for the Registrar of Voters to place an item on the November ballot. Here are some of the arguments put forward to pass this measure. The owners of the North River Farms project contributed more than $200,000 last month to their campaign to get Oceanside voters to approve the development in the city's rural Morrow Hills area. Here are some of the opponents' arguments. We try very hard to give you the latest information on contributions at any point in time, but this is constantly changing. So I will remind you to check in with the Voter's Edge to find the latest information about who's funding the opposition and who's funding the support for any of the measures. What's important now is to consider a yes vote. It would affirm the council's decision to change the zoning and approve North River Farms project. A no vote rejects the council's rezoning of the 176.6 acres for the North River Farms project. Let's move on to Measure M. Measure M, called the Oceanside Cannabis Business Tax, concerns cannabis businesses in the city of Oceanside. This November, 2 other North County cities, by the way, are deciding on cannabis activities, Solana Beach and Encinitas. Vista is the only other North County city to legalize cannabis sales so far, and it collects a 7% tax on gross receipts. The Bureau of Cannabis Control projects that more than half of the adult use purchases currently in the illicit market will transition to the legal market to avoid the inconvenience, stigma, and risks of buying unknown products through an unlicensed seller. The way it is now? Well, beginning as early as 1996, the California legislature and voters have enacted various laws regarding the compassionate medical use and regulation of cannabis. Under these legalization acts, the cities were allowed to prohibit entirely the establishment of commercial medical and non-medical marijuana activities. Fast forward to 2016, California voters legalized commercial, medical, and non-medical marijuana use. Oceanside established a permitting process for some medical cannabis businesses and for cannabis cultivation in the agricultural zone. In August, the Oceanside City Council voted to place Measure M on the ballot for the voters' decision. What would change? Well, the proposed ordinance would do the following. It would authorize up to 6% tax on gross receipts of cannabis retailers, manufacturers, and distributors. Likewise, it would authorize up to a 3.5% tax on gross receipts of cannabis cultivators. As a regulated business, a conditional use permit and a license from the state of California would be required. Any increases in this tax rate would need to be approved by a vote of the people. The city manager would be responsible for administering and enforcing the new ordinance, and the measure would take effect 10 days after the November election results are certified. The new tax rates would take effect on January 1, 2021. The fiscal effects: the city's sales tax consultant estimates that Measure M would generate approximately $1.9 million of revenue annually at the tax rates initially estimated by the council. However, if the maximum rates imposed by the council were increased, the revenue could be as much as $2.9 million annually. There were, of course, some minimal costs for placing this measure on the ballot once again. Here are the supporters of this particular measure. This is what they say. It includes remarks by the mayor of the Oceanside, Peter Weiss, and the chief of police, Frank McCoy. Opponents? The arguments listed here, for the most part, represent the thoughts of the San Diego County Republican Party Chairman, Tony Kravick. In summary, a yes vote imposes a tax on cannabis businesses. A no vote do not impose a new tax on cannabis businesses. Our fourth and final Oceanside measure is Measure W. It has to do with a school district bond. It's important for most of us to realize that most of the funding for K-12 education comes from the state of California. After Prop 13 passed in 1978, it reduced the local property tax revenues available to schools. The state became the primary funder of K-12 education. California has the 5th largest economy in the world, the largest GDP of any state, yet ranks near the bottom, 45th, in nearly every measure of school funding or school staffing. Let's take a look at this pie chart. It reflects the funding sources for Oceanside Unified School District. By way of background, the Oceanside Unified School Board, not the Oceanside City, voted on July 21st approving the issuance of $25 million in new school modernization bonds, as well as refinancing $32 million in existing bonds, saving taxpayers $47 million in debt service costs. Both decisions are part of a longer-term series of capital improvement bond issuances up to $195 million, which voters authorized through Prop H in 2008. The school board has tapped nearly all of its Prop H capacity through 6 bond issuances since 2009, the most recent of which was approved in July. The way it is now, the district has conducted a full evaluation of its facilities needs, has created a facilities master plan, and updated that plan to guide ongoing facilities repair, modernization, and improvement efforts. As Oceanside Unified School District schools continue to age and need attention, the needs list grows. The average age of schools in the district is over 40 years old. In fact, today's Oceanside Unified School District facility needs far exceed the standard funding allotment that the district receives for even facilities and maintenance. No other funding source is available to complete needed repairs and upgrades. So what would change? It would authorize the sale of $160 million in bonds over time at legal interest rates that will be supervised by a citizen oversight committee as required by Ed Code. As a school bond, Measure W requires 55% yes votes to pass. This is the exception to the normal rule of the 50%. Speaking of the lottery, a lot of people have talked about whatever happened to the lottery funds. Why are we passing bonds? The lottery support for the past number of years since 1984 has been approximately 1% of school funding for all the schools in the state of California. What are the budget effects? Well, the total debt service amount is estimated to be $272 million over the life of the bond, that being 30 years. Supporters. There are a lot of legal requirements with regard to how the funds can be used and how transparent the use of the bond money must be. It's important for supporters, it's important for the voters to be reminded that this money cannot be used for operating costs such as staff salaries, pensions, or benefits. The opponents come from the Republican Party. Once again, Tony Kravick, chairman of the Republican Party of San Diego, has indicated what his thoughts are. A yes and no vote on this particular measure. A yes vote supports this measure to authorize $160 million in general obligation bonds for school facilities, and a no vote opposes this measure to authorize $160 million in general obligation bonds for school facilities. I'm now going to turn it over to Meg, who is going to talk to you about the 3 remaining measures for the other North County cities in San Diego County.
Thank you, Bill. Let's jump in with Measure G, Carlsbad Council Compensation. This measure was placed on the ballot by the unanimous vote of the City Council on July 28, 2020. Currently, the Carlsbad City Council may consider an adjustment to its compensation or base salary each year in January up to the amount established by the San Diego Regional Consumer Price Index, or permanently waive a compensation adjustment for the coming year. The City Council is prohibited from enacting retroactive increases if the increases have been waived. The compensation of each member of the City Council is set at $2,052.17 per month, with the mayor receiving an additional $100 per month under City Code. All of the parts of the municipal code related to City Council compensation will stay the same. That is, the Council will review compensation each January based on the San Diego Regional Consumer Price Index, and if they waived increases in previous years, increases could not be made retroactively. What changes is that this Council cannot change this compensation method without a vote of the people. There are no real fiscal effects of this measure except for changes caused by the Consumer Price Index or if the Council decides to waive a CPI increase. Listed here are some of the arguments made in support of this measure by former Mayor Pro Tem Ann Colchin, other former council members, and Phil Urbina, a city council candidate. There was no opposition filed with the city clerk for Measure G. To follow the money and see the latest contributors, look on Voters Edge using this link. In summary, a yes vote would mean the City Council may not change the compensation method without voter approval. A no vote would retain the compensation method in effect, but the City Council may change it without voter approval. Next, we have Measure H in Encinitas, which concerns cannabis businesses in Encinitas. Beginning as early as 1996, the California legislature and voters have enacted various laws regarding the compassionate medical use and regulation of cannabis. Under this legislation, cities were allowed to prohibit commercial medical and non-medical marijuana businesses. Fast forward to 2016, California voters legalized commercial medical and non-medical marijuana usage. Encinitas' prohibitions on cannabis businesses were unchanged. In 2018, the Encinitas City Clerk received an initiative petition to bring this measure to the ballot. It was signed by the residents of Encinitas and certified by the San Diego County Registrar of Voters. Currently, Encinitas Municipal Code on marijuana and marijuana-related activities and uses prohibits every cannabis-related business. Measure H seeks to adopt a new ordinance and amend the municipal code. The new ordinance would authorize zoning changes and regulate cannabis businesses with restrictions. There could be authorization of 4 retail sites, including delivery, in commercial zones. The council could increase this number over time, and the retail licenses would have restrictions. Cultivation sites would be allowed. Manufacturing sites where cannabis is extracted, infused, or packaged would be allowed. Cannabis kitchens where edibles are produced would be authorized with restrictions in certain zones. Distribution sites where you can produce or transport products between businesses would be authorized with restrictions in certain zones. Industrial hemp would be allowed to be grown in agricultural zones. And this initiative measure would also regulate personal use cultivation by, among other things, requiring compliance with applicable law and prohibiting additional city-required permission or registration. No fiscal analysis of this measure was prepared by the city, but it is reasonable to expect there could be some revenue from business fees and taxes and some enforcement expenses. Listed here are some of the arguments made by the supporters of the Citizens Initiative. Supporters include Encinitas residents and also San Diego County Supervisor Nathan Fletcher. And shown here are arguments of the opponents of this measure, who include City Council member Tony Kranz and Encinitas Unified School District trustee Emily Andrade. To follow the money and see the latest in contributors, look on votersedge.org. In summary, a yes vote means you approve of the repeal of the current code and allowing specific cannabis businesses and activities, where a no vote means you oppose the Citizens Initiative and want to continue the current prohibitions. Lastly, we have Measure S in Solana Beach regarding commercial cannabis. The California legislature and voters in 2015 and 2016 legalized commercial medical and non-medical marijuana usage. Under this legislation, cities were allowed to prohibit entirely the establishment of commercial medical and non-medical marijuana activities. Solana Beach did just that. Measure S is a citizens' initiative, meaning it was put on the ballot through signature gathering, as you sometimes see in front of your local supermarket. This type of initiative can only be changed, amended, or repealed by another citizens' initiative. Currently, the Solana Beach Municipal Code prohibits commercial marijuana activities and bans all cultivation of medical and non-medical marijuana. Measure S seeks to repeal this section of the code and replace it with an ordinance authorizing, regulating, and taxing commercial cannabis businesses. What would change is the code, a new municipal ordinance. The proposed ordinance would do the following. Authorize 2 commercial marijuana dispensaries in non-residential zones open daily from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Dispensaries would need to be located at least 600 feet from a public school or another dispensary. There is no distance restriction from private schools, daycare centers, or youth and community centers. To open a dispensary, a business would have to pay $2,500 and compete in an application and ranking process mandated by this ordinance. Indoor medicinal marijuana cultivation of 12 plants per qualified person is allowed, with a maximum of 24 plants per premises. Medical marijuana could be grown at least 1,000 feet away from schools, community centers, and parks, and not on the premises of any religious or youth-oriented facility or child care center. Again, as a citizen initiative, only another vote of the people could change this ordinance. Measure S includes a 1.25% sales tax. The Solana Beach City Attorney's impartial analysis questions the validity of this tax under the state's Revenue and Taxation Code, and notes that the measure doesn't propose to tax medical marijuana sales or deliveries, nor to implement a business tax, which are allowed under that state code. Supporters say 61% of voters in Solana Beach favored legalization of marijuana, but 4 years have gone by and city leaders have not taken any steps towards legalization. Medical marijuana therapies are widely recognized, so having a local dispensary to provide regulated products would benefit the community, and tax revenues would remain in Solana Beach. Studies show legalizing marijuana typically results in lower use by teens and reduction in crime. Supporters include Cannabis Nurse Network, Grow for Vets, and Monica Mendoza, a Solana Beach resident. Opponents say changing regulations by a citizens' initiative takes away local and public control and prevents the usual discussion, amending, and review processes. Kids and schools are not safeguarded since no dispensary distance separation is required from private schools, daycare centers, playgrounds, youth facilities, or churches. 15-hour-per-day dispensaries in marijuana cultivation are allowed citywide, affecting community character. And 82% of California cities do not allow pot shops because of regulatory costs, potential crime, and risk to youth. Opponents include Solana Beach Board of Education, 2 Solana Beach City Council members, L. Taylor, pediatrician, and El Montes, community leader. To follow the money and see the latest in contributors, look on Voters Edge using this link. In summary, a yes vote approves the repeal of the current code and allows specified cannabis businesses and activities, where a no vote opposes the citizens' initiative and continues the current prohibitions. In closing, thank you for your time and attention. If you have questions, we would love to hear from you. Here is how you can reach us online or by phone. You can also contact the San Diego Registrar of Voters at 858-565-5800. Here are other League-sponsored sources of information that can help. The League welcomes your support of our work by becoming a member or contributing on our website. Thank you.